Ozzy passed away on Tuesday, July 22nd, 2025, and I wrote this that night. And it was a way for me to process everything I was feeling, and so I just sort of put it all down, and I'm just going to read that to you. Today was a very strange day. Woke up to a two-word text from my friend Christopher that read, "Ozzy died." He's the same friend I lived with for a while back in 2001 when he woke me up, also on a Tuesday, to the news of 9/11. I had the same reaction to both, a sort of dazed and confused, numb disbelief. I guess we were all sort of expecting bad news eventually from the Ozzy camp, but in the back of our heads, we were hoping he'd beat the odds and surprise us all by living to 100, or at least say for another 10 years or so. Amplifying the disbelief was the fact that I went to bed the night before just after watching a marathon of episodes of The Osbournes, the 2002 reality show about Ozzy's home life. So the last thing I saw on my screen before calling it a night was Ozzy hugging his pink-haired daughter Kelly as she smiled in a daddy's girl sort of way. After the numbness began wearing off, some realizations began to hit me. It sunk in that Ozzy's been around my entire life. But like my friend Justin said, we now live in a world without Ozzy. Someone else said, it's like waking up one day and finding out that the flavor vanilla no longer exists. I know that's kind of obvious, but there's knowing something, and then there's the deep, inescapable truth of something once it finally does hit you. A void began to grow in me, like as if a family member had passed away. Ozzy's music was the soundtrack to many of our lives and made such a huge impression, it's impossible to even imagine what we'd be like if it never existed. For me, it started with curious and somewhat fearful beginnings when my innocent ears heard Crazy Train and Iron Man for the first time. Excuse me. Crazy Train was on the radio when I first heard some madman yell, "All aboard," followed by a crazy laughter. And hearing Iron Man for the first time as Hawk and Animal, the Road Warriors, came out as their intro. It was like their walkout music in the pro wrestling world. Sounded so raw, so menacing and dangerous. That was around the time the satanic panic days were here, when we'd hear rumors and watch news reports making us think that Ozzy was some evil earth-dwelling demon looking to collect souls. As kids, we'd visit our step-uncle, who would sit in his black light-lit room with his friends, smoke weed, and blast bands like Ozzy, Sabbath, Priest, Dio, Steppenwolf, The Doors, Metallica, etc. I'd just sit in the corner completely spooked out, and having nothing to do but look through all the album covers. Covers like The Bark at the Moon, cover Diary of a Madman really freaked me out because I thought he looked a little bit like The Exorcist or like Linda Blair from The Exorcist, which was the scariest movie ever to me. And then the self-titled Black Sabbath album that had that scary witch lady on it. I would just sit and transfixed on her, basically. I wanted to run out of the room, but I didn't want to look like a chicken, so I stayed and just let it all soak in. My stepdad would eventually try to dispel most of my fears by explaining how he once saw Ozzy in concert, and that instead of biting heads off bats or smearing blood all over himself, he actually let doves fly free from cages and wished everybody peace. He ended the conversation by saying, "But yeah, he did bite the head off a bat, but it was an accident. And I think he may have bit the head off a pigeon as well. I'm not sure." So when my 12 cassettes arrived that I ordered from Columbia House, if you guys remember that, Ozzy's tribute album was one of the selections. Having just started guitar, I was instantly fascinated by the guitar work of Randy Rhoads. In fact, one of the first riffs I ever learned was the main riff from Crazy Train, just like for a lot of people. It was a guitar lesson staple, along with many other Ozzy and Sabbath riffs. And much like Kiss Alive and having no internet back then, I was left to just imagine what the live concert actually looked like, instead of just what I was hearing it sound like. I wore the cassette out when taking it up north to my dad's trailer house in the middle of nowhere. It was actually Mora, Minnesota. And with nothing else to play, with nothing else to do, I'd just play tribute and try to learn anything I could out of the tab book and on my brother's guitar. So you could say that Ozzy and Randy were my first two music instructors. I still have the Sacred magazine that I got back then where they tabbed out 4 of Ozzy's songs, each with a different guitarist. And I have it right here. I'm going to do a separate video on it. But yeah, so it had Children of the Grave with Randy Rhoads, Zakk Wylde doing Breaking All the Rules, Jakey Lee Shot in the Dark, and Tony Iommi Sweet Leaf. It's actually the magazine that taught me how to do pinch harmonics, kind of. In junior high, a band comprised of kids 1 year older than us played Crazy Train for the talent show. Our school was huge, so they'd run the show 3 times, once for each grade, and each grade had nearly 500 to 600 students. The place went berserk as soon as the guitarist Johnny Evans kicked into the legendary riff. My friends and I had a spark of inspiration that day to play in next year's talent show, and we made it happen. But we didn't play Ozzy or Sabbath, we played Ride the Lightning by Metallica. This really launched our band, and we had a ton of success over the next 7 years. One day, my mom surprised us by buying us tickets to see Ozzy. Yep, my Korean mom bought us Ozzy tickets. It was for the No More Tours tour. I'm telling you, you could not escape the Ozman around this time, early 90s. No More Tears spawned so many hits, including, of course, the title track. But the next most played song was the tear-inducing Mama, I'm Coming Home. A song that hasn't left my head since the moment I heard the news of his passing. I'm sure it's the same for many others. I didn't know it at the time, but seeing Ozzy at this time was legendary, with a young, beardless Zakk Wylde running around the stage and the crowd wearing his chaps, playing his signature Les Paul and squealing those notes like a maniac. He was only outdone by Ozzy, who was surprisingly mobile as well, tossing buckets of water at the crowd, squat jumping up and down on way past their prime knees. I got the most emotion during the song Road to Nowhere, I recall. Just No More Tears is insane. If you go back and listen through, it's such an epic album from front to back. Some time went by, and I stuck to the guitar, and before long, I went from learning those riffs and licks to teaching them to my own students. Something about those Sabbath and Ozzy riffs just always inspired new players to want to keep going. It would be a long while before I'd see the Ozman again, but it was at Ozzfest, where he'd be doing a solo set followed by the Mighty Sabbath, much like they recently did at the Back to the Beginning concert, except with many more songs performed. Little did I know at the time that it would be the last time many of us saw Pete Steele of Typo Negative and Dimebag and Vinny from Pantera as well. So quite the show to see. Something that I think gets overlooked is how Ozzy kept putting out new material, even though he could have easily just rested on his legendary laurels. On one of the Osbournes episodes, they showed him playing Gets Me Through from his 2001 release called Down to Earth. Great tune. And if you look at the lineup, it's pretty impressive. It's Zakk Wylde, Robert Trujillo, I can never say his last name, and Mike Borden. They were in the band at the time. And I got to give that album another, as they used to say, spin, just because, with that lineup, it's got to be great, And to top it all off, let's see, and he kept releasing all the way up to about 2022, I believe, from what I could find. And to top it off, I heard rumblings that after the recent farewell concert, even though Ozzy wouldn't perform anymore, he was still thinking of writing music. Much like Bowie, a creator till the very end. Gotta love and respect that, of course. This is harder than I thought. Watching the Back to the Beginning concert brought back so many emotions. I remember I caught the whole thing after a gig of my own and just kept feeling that rush inside. Just seeing all those musicians and people who were touched and inspired by him really became apparent. And judging from all the posts today on social media, his reach was way larger than just the music world. I could only post a pic of him and Randy because I had no words at the time, but I did toss on my Black Sabbath shirt in memoriam just as a small gesture. Went to the grocery store and noticed a guy pushing his cart near me. Just a regular looking dude who looked like he just got off work from an office or something. He went out of his way to approach me, and without even looking at me, he said, "Hey, dig the shirt." He didn't even give me time to respond, and I was all ready to say something like, "Yeah, man, tough day." but he was already gone. It was like he didn't want to do anything but just acknowledge the shirt in his own way of honoring Ozzy, I guess. So that'll stay with me. Like I said in my recent concert review, the end really got to me, the end of that final Black Sabbath show. Sabbath had just finished their set, and then Tony and Geezer both went up to Ozzy, who was chairbound, and shook his hand and gave him a cake. But then everyone seemed to just leave the stage, leaving the Prince of Darkness sitting there alone in the darkness. Very deep and meaningful moment, especially now that he's passed. It was like a silent goodbye after the chaos of the day, but eventually the stage began to rotate to the backstage area, and with it, Ozzy, and that was it. And to do my review, I watched the concert a few more times. That's around 18 hours of viewing. This made me curious about all things Ozzy, and I soon put out another video talking about his mystery daughter who stayed out of the spotlight. Her name's Amy. The rabbit hole continued because it made me want to rewatch their reality show, which brings me back to the beginning, pardon the pun. Waking up to my friend's 2-word text the next day, Ozzy died. It was a very strange day. And I have a quick epilogue, just something quick to add to the end here. After writing this, I found myself watching old random Ozzy clips. Saw the rock and roll induction jam where instead of singing, Ozzy sat off to the side with Jack Black. This was in 2004. They showed him singing along to a few of the songs, and it really got to me, but I held it in. You know, he wanted, you could tell he really wanted to be the one singing, just sitting on that chair, watching him singing every word. You know, it was really touching. To shake it off, I decided to go on a little electric scooter ride and listen to some Ozzy. Wasn't able to all day, but thought it was finally fitting. So the song Mama, I'm Coming Home comes on, because I was listening to No More Tears, one of my favorite Ozzy albums, just as I was coming up to this clearing in a path that I like to take. Now, keep in mind, it's 3 a.m., and I've never once seen a person on this trail at this hour. And it's a Tuesday night, you know, middle of the night. And I began to feel this rush of emotion, like I wanted to start crying or something while I was, you know, hearing the song. And so what I was going to do was I was just going to stop because there's no one ever around that area and just maybe shed a few tears or something. And all of a sudden I heard this guy's voice next to me, and it freaked me out at first because, you know, like I said, no one's ever there. And it made me basically, you know, I had to swivel my scooter light to see that it was just this goofy redheaded looking guy smoking a cigarette and talking on his phone just in the middle of this dark path. And so I just gunned it out of there basically because that was too strange for me. And as I rode back home, I thought about how crazy that was, that I've lived there for years and never seen a soul on that path, and then have this happen on this night, just as I was about to break down. Then I got a little bit metaphysical and thought perhaps it was Ozzy's way of telling me not to get too upset by his death. No need to, he's in a better place. I mean, I wrote, I know the last place Ozzy would be, living or dead, would be giving me signs at 3 a.m. on an e-scooter, but it did make me feel better about the whole situation. Rest in peace, John Michael Osborne. Thanks for bringing metal to the masses and giving us all the best outlet for our emotions and for us musicians, creativity. And thanks for discovering and exposing us to so many legendary musicians. Randy, of course, for me, sits at the very top. And it brings a bit of peace thinking that perhaps you guys are out there jamming together and laughing together again. So, the end. Okay, everybody, that's it. That's what I wrote. I kind of wanted to really put down everything I felt in the moment, but reading back on it now, you know, it's sort of stirring it back up as well. So maybe I'll have to take another scooter ride tonight. We'll see. Thanks, everyone.